The sound of her body hitting the frozen ground echoed through the silent forest. Sarah Bennett lay sprawled in the pristine snow, her golden hair fanning out around her head like a broken halo. Blood, bright crimson against white, trickled from her split lip as she struggled to raise herself on trembling arms. "William, please," she whispered, her breath forming desperate clouds in the frigid Montana air. "I carry your child." The tall man atop the chestnut stallion looked down at her, his face a mask of stone carved by hatred and betrayal. William Thornton, cattle baron of the Montana Territory, adjusted his black leather gloves with deliberate slowness. "A whore's promises mean nothing," he said, his voice as cold as the wind that cut through Sarah's thin cotton dress. "Pray to your God that the cold takes you quickly. It's more mercy than you deserve." The two men flanking William shifted uncomfortably in their saddles. Joseph, the foreman, couldn't meet Sarah's eyes, his weathered face twisted with shame. Hank, William's loyal henchman, sneered openly, clutching Sarah's stolen coat in his meaty fist. "Boss," Joseph ventured, his voice barely audible above the rising howl of the wind. "The storm's getting worse. Maybe we shouldn't—" "One more word, Joseph," William interrupted, "and you'll join her." He turned his horse, snow spraying beneath the animal's hooves. "Let's go. The lady has chosen her deathbed." Sarah's fingers clawed at the hem of William's coat as he passed. "William, there was nothing between us. It was just a moment, a single look." William's boot connected with her shoulder, sending her sprawling back into the snow. The pain blossomed across her collarbone, but it was nothing compared to the ache in her heart. 6 months of marriage had transformed the charming man who'd courted her into this monster. Cold, violent, possessive, and now he was leaving her to die because of a single glance exchanged with another man. The men disappeared into the swirling snow, the sound of hoofbeats fading until Sarah was left with nothing but the mournful cry of the wind. The storm was intensifying, snowflakes no longer drifting but driving horizontally through the air, stinging her exposed skin like tiny needles. Sarah curled around her abdomen, protective of the tiny life growing within her. 2 months along, a secret she'd been saving for a special moment, hoping it might soften William's rages. Instead, it had fallen on deaf ears, dismissed as a desperate lie. "I won't let you die," she whispered to her unborn child, though she had no idea how she would keep that promise. The cold was already seeping into her bones, her fingers and toes numb. Her dress, a pretty blue calico that had once been her pride, offered no protection against the Montana winter. William had chosen his punishment well. No one survived a night in these mountains during a blizzard without shelter, without fire. As darkness began to creep around the edges of her vision, Sarah thought of Thomas Eagle Feather. Their interaction had been so brief, so innocent. He had simply handed her a dropped handkerchief at Fort Laramie, their fingers brushing for the briefest moment. Their eyes had met, and something unspoken had passed between them, not lust or impropriety, but recognition. Two souls who understood suffering, who knew what it meant to be trapped. Thomas was half Apache, half white, a man who walked between two worlds and belonged fully to neither. The cavalry valued his tracking skills, but kept him at arm's length. Society tolerated his presence, but never accepted him. Sarah had seen all this in his eyes in that single moment, and William had seen her seeing it. A single tear froze on Sarah's cheek as she remembered the kindness in Thomas's dark eyes. She would never see him again. She would never see anyone again. The snow was almost beautiful as it fell around her, creating a soft white blanket that would become her shroud. She was so tired now, the cold a strange comfort, as it numbed the pain of William's betrayal. Perhaps it wouldn't be so bad to close her eyes, just for a moment. A sound penetrated her fading consciousness, not the wind, but something else. Hoofbeats. Impossible. William wouldn't return, and no one else knew she was here. Yet the sound grew closer, accompanied by the soft jingle of tack and the snort of a horse pushing through deep snow. With tremendous effort, Sarah forced her eyes open. A figure on horseback materialized from the swirling white, like an apparition from a dream. The rider dismounted in a fluid motion and approached cautiously, tracking the disturbed snow where William and his men had been. Even through her blurred vision, Sarah recognized the distinctive silhouette, the proud bearing, the raven-black hair falling from beneath a wide-brimmed hat. Thomas Eagle Feather knelt beside her, his face etched with concern as he gently brushed snow from her cheek. "Miss Sarah?" His voice was deep and melodic, with just a hint of an accent. "Who did this to you?" Sarah tried to speak, but her lips were too numb to form words. Instead, a small whimper escaped her throat. Thomas didn't waste time with more questions. He shrugged out of his fur-lined coat and wrapped it around her trembling body. The sudden warmth was almost painful against her frozen skin. "I've been tracking a mountain lion," he explained, gathering her in his arms as if she weighed nothing. "Saw the tracks of 3 horses heading into the storm. Didn't seem right." His dark eyes flashed with anger as he understood what had happened. "Your husband?" Sarah managed a weak nod. Thomas's jaw tightened, but he kept his voice gentle. "My people have a camp 2 miles east, hidden in a valley, protected from the wind. I will take you there." "Why?" Sarah whispered, the question barely audible. Why would he help her? Why risk William's wrath? Thomas looked down at her, something unreadable flickering in his eyes. "Because no one deserves to die alone in the cold." He hesitated, then added softly, "And because I saw you too that day at the fort." He lifted her onto his horse with surprising gentleness, then mounted behind her, cradling her against his chest. His heartbeat was strong and steady against her back, his arms secure around her waist as he guided the horse through the worsening storm. "The baby," Sarah murmured, her consciousness beginning to fade again, despite her best efforts to stay awake. "My baby." Thomas's arms tightened slightly around her. "Your child has the blood of fighters," he said, his breath warm against her ear. "And so do you, Miss Sarah. Hold on to that." As they rode through the blinding snow, Sarah felt something she hadn't experienced in months. Hope. It bloomed in her chest despite the cold, despite the danger that still surrounded them. Thomas leaned down, his lips close to her ear, as he whispered words that seemed to chase away the darkness closing in around her vision. "You'll live, Sarah," he promised, his voice as steady and unyielding as a mountain. "You'll live." The wind seemed to carry his words into the very core of her being, sealing a pact between them. And in that moment, caught between life and death, Sarah felt something stir within her heart, something that had nothing to do with gratitude and everything to do with destiny. As consciousness slipped away, one final thought crystallized in her mind. William had meant to end her life today, but instead, he might have given her the chance to truly begin living. The storm raged on, enveloping the pair in swirling white as they vanished into the wilderness. 2 souls connected by a glance, bound together by circumstance, and perhaps by something far more powerful that neither yet dared to name. Flames danced in Sarah's dreams, golden tongues of fire that both threatened and beckoned. She floated between worlds, one cold and white, the other warm and filled with strange shadows. Voices drifted around her, speaking in a language she didn't understand, yet somehow their meaning reached her heart, if not her mind. When Sarah finally opened her eyes, the first thing she saw was fire, not the vengeful inferno of her dreams, but a small, carefully tended blaze crackling in a stone-ringed pit. The second thing she noticed was that she was no longer cold. She lay wrapped in soft furs, inside what appeared to be a hide-covered lodge. The smoke from the fire rose toward an opening at the top, where occasional snowflakes drifted in only to vanish in the warm air. Outside, the wind still howled, but in here there was only warmth and the gentle crackle of burning wood. "You return to us." The voice startled her. Sarah turned her head to find an elderly woman sitting cross-legged on the other side of the fire. Her face was a map of wrinkles, each one etched by time and wisdom. Her silver-streaked hair hung in 2 long braids, adorned with small beads that caught the firelight. "Where am I?" Sarah's voice emerged as a croak, her throat parched and raw. The old woman passed her a wooden cup filled with a steaming liquid that smelled of herbs and honey. "You are with the people, the ND, those you call Apache." She helped Sarah sit up enough to drink. "I am Morning Star, mother of Thomas Eagle Feather." Sarah took a cautious sip. The liquid was bitter but soothing as it slid down her throat. "Thomas, he found me in the snow." Morning Star nodded, her dark eyes reflecting the firelight. "My son has always had the gift of finding what others wish to remain hidden." She studied Sarah with a gaze that seemed to penetrate to her very soul. "He says your husband left you to die." The memory flooded back, William's cold eyes, the cruel set of his mouth, the sound of hoofbeats fading into the storm. Sarah's hand instinctively went to her abdomen. "My baby." "The child lives," Morningstar said, a small smile softening her weathered features. "You are strong, like the willow that bends in the storm, but does not break." She placed her wrinkled hand over Sarah's. "Rest now. We will speak more when your strength returns." Before Sarah could ask more questions, exhaustion claimed her once again, pulling her back into the embrace of healing sleep. When she woke next, the fire had burned lower, and Morning Star was gone. In her place sat Thomas, his tall frame seemingly too large for the confines of the lodge. He was carving something from a piece of wood, his hands moving with precise, economical movements. Sarah watched him silently for a moment, taking in the strong line of his jaw, the high cheekbones that spoke of his Apache heritage, the intense concentration in his eyes. He wore a simple buckskin shirt adorned with small beadwork at the collar. His black hair was tied back with a leather thong, revealing a small scar at his temple. As if sensing her gaze, Thomas looked up, his expression softening when he saw she was awake. "Miss Sarah," he said, setting aside his carving. "How do you feel?" "Alive," she replied, managing a weak smile. "Thanks to you." Thomas shook his head slightly. "Thanks to your own strength. Many would not have survived such exposure." Sarah tried to sit up, wincing as pain shot through her shoulder where William's boot had connected. Thomas was at her side instantly, supporting her with a gentle hand at her back. "Careful," he said. "You have bruises that need time to heal." "How long have I been here?" Sarah asked, suddenly aware that she was dressed in a soft deerskin dress rather than her own clothing. 3 days, Thomas replied. "The storm has only just passed." He hesitated, then added, "My mother and the other women tended to you. Your dress was wet and frozen. He gestured to her current attire, a faint flush coloring his cheeks. Sarah felt her own face grow warm at the implication. "Please thank them for me." An awkward silence fell between them, filled only by the soft crackle of the fire. There were so many questions Sarah wanted to ask, so many things she needed to know, but she wasn't sure where to begin. Thomas saved her the trouble. "Your husband," he said, his voice careful, neutral. "He believes you were unfaithful?" Sarah's eyes dropped to her hands, which were clasped tightly in her lap. "With you," she whispered. Thomas went very still. "Because of the handkerchief at Fort Laramie." "Because of the way I looked at you," Sarah corrected, finding the courage to meet his gaze. "The way you looked at me." Something flickered in Thomas's dark eyes. Recognition, perhaps, or memory. "I remember," he said quietly. "It was nothing," Sarah said quickly. "A moment of, I don't know what to call it, connection perhaps, but nothing improper ever happened. Yet he left you to die for it." The bluntness of his statement made Sarah flinch. "William has demons. He was not always so cruel." Even as she said it, she wondered if that was true. Had William always possessed this capacity for cruelty, and she had simply been too blinded by his charm to see it? "What will you do now?" Thomas asked, his voice gentle but direct. It was the question Sarah had been avoiding since she first woke. What could she do? A woman alone in the territories carrying a child, with a husband who wanted her dead. Her options were painfully limited. "I don't know," she admitted. "I can't go back to William. He would kill me, truly kill me this time. And I have nowhere else to go." Her parents were dead. Her few friends back in Denver society would want nothing to do with a woman whose husband had cast her out. "You could stay with us," Thomas said, the suggestion hanging in the air between them like smoke. "Until the child is born, at least. Until you decide what path to take." Sarah stared at him, searching for any hint of impropriety in his offer, any suggestion of expectations. She found none. His face was open, his offer seemingly motivated only by concern for her welfare. "Why would you do that?" she asked. "You don't know me, and helping me could bring William's wrath down on your people?" A ghost of a smile touched Thomas's lips. "My people have faced worse enemies than one angry white man." "You didn't answer my first question," Sarah pressed. "Why help me?" Thomas was silent for a long moment, his eyes on the fire. When he finally spoke, his voice was low, almost a confession. "Because when our eyes met that day at the fort, I saw something I recognized, a soul trapped in a life not of their choosing." He looked up at her, his gaze direct and unwavering. "I know what that is like, to live between worlds, belonging fully to neither." Sarah felt her throat tighten with emotion. "I made my choice when I married William." "Did you?" Thomas challenged gently. "Or did circumstances choose for you?" The question struck Sarah like a physical blow. Had she truly chosen William, or had she simply accepted the only option that seemed available to a young woman whose family had lost everything? Had she ever truly had a choice at all? Before she could formulate a response, the lodge flap opened and Morning Star entered, accompanied by a gust of cold air and a young Apache woman carrying a wooden bowl of what smelled like stew. "You talk too much, my son," Morning Star said, though there was affection in her tone. "She needs food, not words." Thomas rose to his feet in a fluid motion. "I will check on her horse," he said, nodding to Sarah before ducking out of the lodge. The young woman set the bowl beside Sarah with a shy smile before following Thomas out. Morning Star settled herself by the fire once more, her knowing eyes fixed on Sarah's face. "You are confused," the older woman stated matter-of-factly. Sarah nodded, accepting the bowl of stew. It contained some kind of game meat, tender and rich with unfamiliar roots and herbs. "Everything has happened so quickly. 3 days ago I was William Thornton's wife. Now you are Sarah," Morningstar said simply. Nothing more, nothing less. The rest will come in time. Sarah took a spoonful of the stew, savoring the rich flavors. Your people, will they accept me here? Morningstar's expression turned thoughtful. Some will not. The white man's government pushes us further into the mountains each year. Many of our young men have died fighting the bluecoats. There is bitterness. She reached out to touch Sarah's golden hair, a gesture both curious and gentle. But you are carrying new life. That is sacred to all people. And Thomas? Sarah asked, unable to keep herself from voicing the question that had been lingering in her mind. What is his place here? A complex emotion passed over Morningstar's face. My son walks a difficult path. His father was a white trader who stayed with our band for 2 winters. He taught Thomas the white man's language, gave him books, showed him maps of places beyond the mountains. Her voice grew softer. When Thomas was 10 winters old, his father left to bring supplies. He never returned. I'm sorry, Sarah said, genuinely moved by the story. Morningstar acknowledged this with a slight nod. Thomas has his father's height, his way with words, but he has my people's heart, our connection to the land. The army values his skills but does not trust him fully. Our young men respect his strength but remember his mixed blood when it suits them. She sighed. He belongs everywhere and nowhere. The description resonated with something deep inside Sarah. Wasn't that how she had felt these past months with William? Present in his house, at his table, in his bed, yet never truly belonging, never truly accepted for who she was, rather than who he wanted her to be. What will happen when my husband discovers I'm alive? Sarah asked, giving voice to the fear that had been growing inside her. Morningstar's expression hardened slightly. The white man who left you and your unborn child to die in the snow is no longer your husband. Not in the eyes of the Creator. She leaned forward, her gaze intense. But you are right to be cautious. William Thornton is a man of pride and power. When he learns you live, he will come looking. Then I should leave, Sarah said, though the thought of venturing back into the wilderness filled her with dread. I don't want to bring danger to your people. Where would you go? Morningstar asked practically. The nearest white settlement is 4 days' ride. The snow is still deep in the passes. She shook her head. No, you will stay until the child quickens in your womb. Then we will decide what path is best. Sarah wanted to protest, to insist that she couldn't impose on their hospitality, couldn't risk their safety. But the reality of her situation was undeniable. She had nowhere else to go, no one else to turn to. Thank you, she said instead, humbled by the generosity of these people who owed her nothing. Morningstar nodded, accepting her gratitude without comment. Rest now. Tomorrow, if you are strong enough, you will meet the others. After the older woman had left, Sarah lay back among the furs, her mind whirling with all that had happened. She placed a protective hand over her abdomen, feeling a fierce surge of love for the tiny life growing within her. We're safe for now, little one, she whispered, and somehow we'll find our way. Outside the lodge, she could hear the sounds of the camp, children's laughter, the low murmur of conversations, the rhythmic beat of someone working leather, life continuing. Despite the harsh winter, despite the challenges, there was something profoundly comforting in that simple fact. As she drifted toward sleep, Sarah found herself thinking of Thomas Eagle Feather, his gentle hands, his direct gaze, the quiet strength he radiated. In the brief moments they had shared, he had shown her more respect, more consideration than William had in months of marriage. It was a dangerous comparison to make, she knew, dangerous and unfair. Thomas had rescued her, cared for her, when she was at her most vulnerable. Of course she felt gratitude, perhaps even a certain fondness, but to mistake those feelings for anything deeper would be foolish. Yet as sleep claimed her, Sarah couldn't help but wonder what might have happened if she had met Thomas Eagle Feather first, before William, before all the choices that had led her to this strange crossroads. And in the space between wakefulness and dreams, she heard his voice again, the promise that had called her back from the brink of death. You'll live, Sarah, you'll live. This time, it sounded less like a reassurance and more like a prophecy, one that carried within it possibilities she had never dared to imagine. The weeks passed like water flowing through mountain streams, sometimes rushing forward in moments of clarity, sometimes slowing to a contemplative trickle. January gave way to February, and the iron grip of winter began to loosen ever so slightly. The days grew longer, the nights less bitter, and Sarah Bennett grew stronger. By her 4th week with the Apache band, Sarah had established a rhythm to her days. She rose with the sun and joined the women at their morning tasks, grinding corn, preparing hides, mending clothing. Her fingers, once soft and pampered from Denver society life, grew calloused and nimble. The women taught her their songs, their stories, their ways of seeing the world. Not all welcomed her presence. Some of the elders regarded her with suspicion, and several young warriors made no effort to hide their disdain for the white woman in their midst. But under Morning Star's protection, none dared to challenge her right to stay. And then there was Thomas. He came and went like the wind itself, sometimes absent for days while scouting for the army at Fort Laramie, other times present from dawn until dusk. When in camp, he kept a respectful distance, yet Sarah often caught him watching her with an intensity that made her heart quicken. They spoke rarely, but when they did, their conversations lingered in Sarah's mind for days afterward. Thomas taught her words in the Apache language, explained the significance of the beadwork patterns on the women's dresses, told her stories of the stars that filled the night sky. Each interaction added another layer to the complex tapestry of the man who had saved her life. It was on a clear February morning, with the sun glinting off snow-covered peaks, that everything changed. Sarah was kneeling by the stream that ran near the camp, washing a deerskin dress that Morning Star had given her. The water was achingly cold, numbing her hands as she worked. So absorbed was she in her task that she didn't hear the approach of hoofbeats until they were nearly upon her. She looked up, expecting to see Thomas or perhaps one of the other Apache men returning from a hunt. Instead, she found herself staring into the face of Joseph, William's foreman. For a moment, they simply gazed at each other in mutual shock. Then Joseph dismounted slowly, as if afraid any sudden movement might cause Sarah to vanish like a ghost. "Mrs. Thornton," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "Is it really you?" Sarah rose to her feet, clutching the wet dress to her chest like a shield. "Joseph," she acknowledged, her voice steadier than she felt. The foreman took a step toward her, then stopped, taking in her appearance, the Apache dress she wore, her hair braided in the style of the women, the small pouch of protective herbs Morning Star had insisted she carry. "We thought you were dead," he said, shaking his head in disbelief. "Mr. Thornton, he told everyone you'd gone riding alone and got caught in the blizzard." "Is that what he told you to say?" Sarah asked, unable to keep the bitterness from her voice. Joseph had the grace to look ashamed. "I wanted to go back for you," he said. "After we left, I told Mr. Thornton it wasn't right leaving you out there, especially in your condition. Yet you rode away all the same." Sarah's words were not an accusation, merely a statement of fact. Joseph's gaze dropped to the ground. "Yes, ma'am, I did." He looked up again, his weathered face troubled. "How did you survive?" "Thomas Eagle Feather found me," Sarah replied simply. "He brought me to his people." Understanding dawned on Joseph's face. The half-Apache scout. He glanced around nervously, as if expecting Apache warriors to materialize from the trees. "You've been living with Indians all this time." "They saved my life when my husband left me to die," Sarah said, a protective fierceness entering her voice. "They've shown me more kindness than I ever found in William's house." Joseph removed his hat, turning it absently in his hands. "Mr. Thornton has been like a man possessed since he came back without you, drinking heavily, firing half the ranch hands, riding out alone for days at a time." He hesitated. "He mourns you, in his way." Sarah laughed, a short, harsh sound that held no humor. "He mourns his pride, Joseph, nothing more." She placed a protective hand over her slightly swollen abdomen, now visible beneath her dress. "What are you doing here so far from the ranch?" "Tracking a mountain lion that's been taking calves," Joseph replied. "Followed its trail up into these hills." He paused, clearly struggling with some internal conflict. "Mrs. Thornton—" "Sarah," she corrected. "I am no longer Mrs. Thornton." "Sarah," Joseph amended. "You need to know. Mr. Thornton will be leading a group of men up this way tomorrow. They've gotten reports of Apache moving through these valleys. The army at Fort Laramie has asked for civilian volunteers to help track them." Cold fear gripped Sarah's heart. To what end? Joseph's expression told her everything she needed to know. "There was a raid on a settlement south of here last week. 3 settlers killed, livestock taken. The army believes it was this band." "That's impossible," Sarah protested. "These people have been here all winter. They haven't left the valley." "Maybe so," Joseph conceded. "But Mr. Thornton and the others won't be asking questions first." He replaced his hat, his decision apparently made. "I should go. If Mr. Thornton finds out I've seen you, that I didn't bring you back, you would leave me again?" Sarah asked quietly. Joseph flinched as if struck. "I'm sorry, Mrs. Sarah, truly I am, but Mr. Thornton is not a man to cross." He mounted his horse, looking down at her with genuine regret. "For what it's worth, I'm glad you're alive." Before Sarah could respond, he turned his horse and rode away, leaving her standing by the stream with fear coursing through her veins like ice water. She had to warn the camp. Gathering up the wet dress, Sarah hurried back along the path that led to the Apache encampment. Her mind raced with the implications of Joseph's news. William was coming, tomorrow, with armed men. And they wouldn't distinguish between this peaceful band and the Apache who had allegedly raided the settlement. The camp was in its usual state of midday activity when Sarah arrived, breathless from her hurried return. Children played a game with painted stones. Women worked at various crafts, and men tended to weapons or horses. A scene of ordinary life that would be shattered if William found them. "Morning Star!" Sarah called, searching for Thomas's mother among the lodges. "Morning Star!" The old woman emerged from her lodge, alarm crossing her face when she saw Sarah's distress. "What has happened, daughter?" she asked, using the term of affection she had begun to call Sarah in recent days. Sarah quickly explained what Joseph had told her, aware that others were gathering around to listen. By the time she finished, most of the camp had heard the news. "We must move," said Running Elk, one of the tribal elders. "Now, before the white men come." "There is no time to break camp properly," argued Black Wolf, a young warrior who had made no secret of his dislike for Sarah. "Because of her, we may all die." "The warning comes because of her," Morning Star countered sharply. "Without it, we would have no chance at all." The debate might have continued, but it was interrupted by the arrival of 3 riders entering the camp at a gallop. Thomas was in the lead, his face grim as he dismounted. "Soldiers are coming," he announced without preamble. "A full company from Fort Laramie guided by William Thornton and his men." Sarah's heart sank. Not tomorrow, but today. Joseph had lied about the timing, either deliberately or because he himself had been misinformed. "How long do we have?" asked Running Elk. "Hours at most," Thomas replied. "They are following the creek up from the South Valley." The camp erupted into organized chaos as the Apache began preparing for a hasty departure. Lodge coverings were pulled down, essential belongings packed, horses brought in from the meadow where they grazed. Sarah stood in the midst of it all, a terrible guilt washing over her. These people had taken her in, cared for her, protected her, and now, because of her, they were in danger. She felt a hand on her arm and turned to find Thomas beside her, his dark eyes intense. "This is not your doing," he said, as if reading her thoughts. "They're coming because of me," Sarah whispered. "William won't stop until he finds me." Thomas's jaw tightened. "They're coming because the white man has always come for my people. With or without you, this day would have arrived." He glanced around at the frantic activity. "But we will not be here when they arrive." "Where will we go?" Sarah asked. "There is a place in the high mountains," Thomas explained. "A sacred valley known only to our people. We will be safe there until the soldiers tire of searching." The practical part of Sarah's mind recognized the wisdom of this plan, but another part of her, a part she was only beginning to acknowledge, rebelled at the thought of continuing to put these people in danger. "I should go," she said suddenly. "Give myself up to William. Tell him I got lost in the storm, that I found shelter in an abandoned cabin. If he believes I've had no contact with your people, he might call off the search." Thomas's expression darkened. "And what would happen to you, to your child?" Sarah had no answer for that. They both knew what William was capable of. "You belong with us now," Thomas said, his voice gentler. He stopped, something vulnerable flashing in his eyes before he regained his composure. "We protect our own." Before Sarah could respond, Black Wolf approached, his expression thunderous. "The white woman brings death to our camp," he said in English, clearly intending for Sarah to understand. "First her husband, now soldiers. How many more will follow?" Thomas stepped between them, his posture subtly shifting to one of authority. "Enough, Black Wolf. The council has decided. She stays with us." "You decide," Black Wolf spat, "because she warms your furs at night, because you think with your—" Thomas moved with a speed that took Sarah's breath away. One moment he was standing beside her, the next he had Black Wolf by the throat, lifting the smaller man until he was on his tiptoes. "Choose your next words carefully, brother," Thomas said, his voice deadly quiet. "They may be your last." Morning Star appeared, placing a restraining hand on her son's arm. "There is no time for this," she said firmly. "The soldiers come closer with every moment we waste." Slowly, Thomas released Black Wolf, who stumbled back, gasping for air but still defiant. "This is not finished between us, half-breed," he growled, before stalking away. Thomas turned to Sarah, his expression unreadable. "So we must go, now." Sarah nodded, too shaken by the confrontation to argue further. She followed Thomas to where the horses were being prepared, accepting his help as he lifted her onto a paint mare that had become her mount during her time with the Apache. As the band moved out, traveling north toward the high country, Sarah couldn't help looking back at the camp that had been her home these past weeks. The lodges were gone, the fire pits covered, all traces of their presence erased with practiced efficiency. By the time William and the soldiers arrived, they would find nothing but empty ground and cold ashes. They rode hard through the day, following game trails that wound ever upward into the mountains. The air grew thinner, the wind sharper. Sarah's back ached from the jarring pace, and she found herself struggling to keep up as the hours wore on. Thomas rode beside her, occasionally reaching over to steady her when she swayed in the saddle. His presence was both comforting and confusing. Black Wolf's crude implication had stirred questions Sarah had been carefully avoiding. What exactly was Thomas Eagle Feather to her? A rescuer? A friend? Something more? As the sun began to set, painting the snow-covered peaks in shades of gold and crimson, Running Elk finally called a halt in a sheltered hollow, surrounded by dense pine forest. It wasn't the sacred valley Thomas had mentioned, that was still a day's journey away, but it would serve as a temporary refuge for the night. With practiced efficiency, the Apache set up a minimal camp, just enough for one night's rest before continuing their journey at first light. No fires were lit, for fear the smoke might be spotted. Instead, they huddled in small groups, sharing dried meat and speaking in hushed tones. Sarah found herself sitting between Morning Star and Little Dove, a young woman who had been especially kind to her during her time in the camp. They shared a small portion of pemmican, the rich mixture of dried meat, fat, and berries, providing much-needed sustenance after the long day's ride. "Will the soldiers follow us this far?" Sarah asked quietly. Little Dove shook her head. "White men do not like the high places," she said in her limited English. "Too much snow, too hard to breathe." "William will follow," Sarah said, certainty in her voice. "He won't stop until he finds me." Morning Star studied Sarah's face in the fading light. "This man, he does not love you. He never did. Why does he hunt you so fiercely?" Sarah considered the question, searching for an answer that made sense even to herself. "Pride," she finally said. "In William's world, a man's wife is his possession. By surviving, by escaping him, I've challenged his control, his reputation." "And the child?" Morning Star asked. "The child is his heir," Sarah replied simply. "His bloodline, his legacy. He wouldn't allow another man to raise his son." Little Dove looked confused. "How do you know it is a son?" Sarah smiled, placing a hand on her growing belly. "I don't. But William would only care if it were a boy." The conversation faded as darkness settled over the camp. One by one, the Apache wrapped themselves in blankets and buffalo robes, seeking what rest they could find on the cold ground. Sarah found herself a small space between two large pines, spreading her blanket and trying to find a comfortable position. Sleep eluded her. Her mind was too full of the day's events, of William's approaching threat, of Thomas's words, "You belong with us now." Every time she closed her eyes, she saw Black Wolf's accusing face, heard his implication about her relationship with Thomas. A shadow fell across her, and Sarah looked up to find Thomas standing there, a heavy buffalo robe in his arms. "You should sleep," he said softly. "Tomorrow's journey will be difficult." "I can't," Sarah admitted. "My thoughts won't quiet." Thomas hesitated, then held out the robe. "At least stay warm. The night will be cold." Sarah accepted the offering gratefully, wrapping it around her shoulders. The robe carried Thomas's scent, leather, pine, and something uniquely him. "Thank you." Instead of leaving, Thomas sat down beside her, keeping a respectful distance, but close enough that she could feel the warmth radiating from his body. "What Black Wolf said today," Sarah began hesitantly. "About me, about us." "Black Wolf speaks without thinking," Thomas interrupted, his voice tight. "He has always resented my place in the tribe." "Is there truth in his words?" Sarah pressed, surprising herself with her boldness. "About your feelings for me?" Thomas was silent for so long that Sarah thought he might not answer. When he finally spoke, his voice was low, almost a whisper. "Among my mother's people, it is believed that every soul recognizes those to whom it is connected, even across great distances, even across the divide between worlds." He turned to look at her, his eyes reflecting the starlight. "When I saw you that day at Fort Laramie, something in me recognized something in you." Sarah's breath caught in her throat. "Thomas, I know," he said quickly. "You are married to another. You carry his child. There can be nothing between us." His gaze dropped to his hands. "But you asked for truth, and I have given it." The admission hung in the air between them, at once a barrier and a bridge. Sarah felt as if she stood at a precipice, with one world behind her and another before her, and no clear path to follow. "I don't know what I feel," she confessed, her voice barely audible. "Everything has happened so quickly. 3 months ago I was William's wife, living in a fine house playing the role society expected of me. Now I'm here, in the mountains, with people I barely know, running from the man who vowed to love and protect me." She looked up at Thomas, allowing him to see the confusion in her eyes. "How can I trust any feeling when my entire world has been turned upside down?" Thomas nodded, understanding in his expression. "You don't need to know now," he said gently. "Some truths reveal themselves only with time." He rose to his feet in a fluid motion. "We should both rest. Dawn comes early in the mountains." As he turned to go, Sarah reached out impulsively, catching his hand. The contact sent a jolt through her, like the static electricity that sometimes crackled in her hair when she brushed it on dry winter nights. "Thank you," she said, "for saving my life, for giving me a chance to find out who I truly am, beyond William's wife, beyond Sarah Bennett of Denver society." Thomas's fingers tightened briefly around hers. "Perhaps that is why our paths crossed," he said, "so that we might both discover who we truly are." With that, he slipped away into the darkness, leaving Sarah with the warmth of the buffalo robe and the lingering sensation of his hand in hers. As she finally drifted toward sleep, Sarah found herself thinking of the future, not just tomorrow's journey or the days that would follow, but the months and years that stretched before her. For the first time since that fateful day in the snow, she allowed herself to imagine a life beyond survival, beyond running. A life where she might make choices based not on necessity or expectation, but on the truths of her own heart. And in that moment, balanced on the edge of sleep, Sarah acknowledged what she had been avoiding for weeks, that Thomas Eagle Feather had awakened something within her, something that had been dormant during all her months with William, something that both frightened and exhilarated her. Whether it was gratitude or connection, or something deeper still, only time would tell. But as she surrendered to exhaustion, wrapped in the robe that carried his scent, Sarah knew with certainty that her life had been irrevocably changed the moment Thomas had found her in the snow and whispered those words that had called her back from the brink of death. "You'll live, Sarah, you'll live." Words that no longer seemed like just a promise of survival, but a promise of something far more profound, a chance to truly live, with all the joy and pain and wonder that such a life might bring. Dawn painted the mountains gold as Sarah watched the Apache prepare to continue their journey. The peaceful moment shattered when a scout galloped into camp with alarming news. William and 20 men, including soldiers, had tracked them through the night and were less than an hour behind. "We must divide," Thomas announced, his expression grave. "The main group will continue to the Sacred Valley. A smaller group will create a false trail to draw them away." "I will go," Black Wolf volunteered, stepping forward. "As will I," Thomas said. "And I," Sarah added firmly. When Thomas began to protest, she touched his arm. "William is following me. If I'm not with the decoy group, he might realize it's a trick." Their small group, Sarah, Thomas, Black Wolf, and 2 warriors, set off southward, deliberately leaving clear tracks in the snow. They rode hard through treacherous mountain passes, the sounds of pursuit growing closer with each passing hour. "The trading post is just beyond that ridge," Thomas said as they paused in a small clearing. "But they're too close. We won't all make it there." Black Wolf dismounted, checking his rifle. "Then some of us stay behind. Delay them." "You can't just stay here to die," Sarah protested. "Not to die, white woman, to fight." Black Wolf's eyes shifted to Thomas. "Take her to safety. If we don't return by nightfall, go on without us." Thomas clasped forearms with each warrior before leading Sarah away. The abandoned trading post came into view, a simple structure of logs and stone, long deserted. "We'll wait here until nightfall," Thomas said as they took shelter inside. The distant crack of rifle fire echoed through the mountains as Black Wolf's ambush was sprung. The shooting continued for nearly an hour before an eerie silence fell. As the sun began to set, hoofbeats approached. Thomas positioned himself with his rifle ready as Joseph, William's foreman, called from outside. "Sarah, are you in there? I'm alone." Joseph entered with his hands raised, his face streaked with blood and dirt. "Ambush. 2 soldiers dead, several wounded. Mr. Thornton took a bullet, but he's still coming." He reached into his coat and withdrew a small leather pouch. "There's a mining camp 3 days south. I brought what money I could gather." "Why are you helping us?" Sarah asked, bewildered. "Because what Mr. Thornton did wasn't right. He plans to have you declared insane, put in an asylum until the baby comes, then take the child." They quickly formulated a plan. Sarah would take Joseph's fresh horse, while Thomas rode her tired mare. Joseph would stay behind to buy them time. Night had fallen when they finally stopped to rest beside a mountain stream. Thomas built a small fire, carefully shielded to prevent visible smoke. "If we reach this mining camp, what then?" Sarah asked, as they sat close together for warmth. "That depends on what you want," Thomas replied simply. Your life is your own now. The possibilities stretched before Sarah like an unknown country. What about you? What do you want? Thomas stared into the fire before answering. For most of my life I've belonged nowhere completely. Too Apache for the white world, too white for my mother's people. His eyes held a vulnerability she had never seen before. But these past weeks with you, I've begun to think perhaps belonging isn't about a place, but about a person. I don't know what tomorrow will bring, Sarah said, reaching for his hand. But I know that whatever comes, I want to face it with you. The crack of a rifle shot shattered their moment, the bullet splintering a tree trunk inches from Thomas's head. Found you at last, Sarah, came William's voice from the darkness. Did you really think you could escape me? Thomas pulled her behind the shelter of rocks, positioning himself protectively. When I start shooting, run. Don't stop, don't look back. I won't leave you, Sarah protested. We go together or not at all. Suddenly, a new voice called out. Thornton, this has gone far enough. Joseph emerged from the trees, accompanied by soldiers led by a captain. Your foreman has told us everything, the officer said to William. How you abandoned your wife in a blizzard. How you've been hunting her to silence her. Joseph is lying, William snarled. The Apache bewitched him, just as they've bewitched my wife. Come out, Mrs. Thornton, the captain called. You have my word no harm will come to you or your companion. Slowly they emerged from hiding, Thomas keeping a protective arm around Sarah. The captain assured them that William would face charges of attempted murder and ordered his men to take William into custody. At the army camp, Sarah was given a tent and medical attention. The doctor pronounced both her and the baby healthy despite their ordeal. As dawn broke on their first day of freedom, Thomas came to check on her. What happens now? Sarah asked, her hand in his. William will face charges at Fort Laramie, Thomas replied. After that, it depends on what you want. Sarah's eyes met his, certain and clear for the first time in months. From that first moment at Fort Laramie, something in me has recognized something in you. I want us to build a life together, Thomas. One day at a time, one choice at a time. Thomas raised her hand to his lips. Then that is what we shall do. 3 months later, they stood together on the porch of a small cabin near the mining camp. The valley below was turning green with spring, new life emerging after the long winter. Sarah's belly had grown round with the child that would arrive by summer's end. Any regrets? Thomas asked, his arm around her shoulders as they watched the sunset paint the mountains in shades of fire. Sarah leaned into his embrace, thinking of the journey that had brought them here. From the moment William had abandoned her in the snow to this peaceful evening, she had traversed not just physical distance, but the much greater distance from despair to hope, from possession to freedom, from mere survival to truly living. Not one, she answered, turning to face the man who had become her future. You promised me I would live, Thomas Eagle Feather, and now I finally understand what that truly means. As the first stars appeared in the darkening sky, their lips met in a kiss that sealed a promise made months ago in a snowstorm. Not just to survive, but to thrive, to love, to build something new from the ashes of what had been lost. Together, they had kindled an ember of destiny into a flame that would light their way forward, one day at a time. Thank you for watching this dramatic tale of survival, courage, and forbidden love in the Old West. If you enjoyed this story of Sarah and Thomas's journey, please don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more captivating historical dramas and romance stories that will transport you to another time and place. Hit that subscribe button now to never miss our weekly uploads of immersive storytelling that brings history to life. New stories every Friday that will keep you on the edge of your seat. What did you think of Sarah and Thomas's journey? Let us know in the comments below which character was your favorite and what historical period you'd like to see in our next story. Until next time.